You know what you're about to listen to? The Coolville Urbanism Podcast. I'm your host, Mikael colville-andersen. I speak to the Chief Design Officer of Helsinki, Hanna Harris. Especially in the Nordic countries, a number of cities have a city architect, a position with varying influence depending on the city that is geared towards maintaining coherence and functionality between architecture and public space and the city at large. The very title of Chief Design Officer sounds impressive and innovative. In fact, it's a recent invention, gaining momentum in the corporate sphere a decade or so ago. Corporations and banks got on the bandwagon and got themselves a CDO. The very idea that design is an integral and important element in business finally saw the light of day. That design should be integral and important in cities is even more obvious and intuitive, especially after decades where engineering has dominated the conversation. With that said, not many cities have a chief design officer. Helsinki was the first city in the world to create the position back in 2016. I know that Seoul, Korea followed suit, and shortly before the pandemic started, I met the newly appointed Chief Design Officer for Los Angeles, Christopher Hawthorne, to discuss his visions for the city. As someone who works with design daily, I'm like, yeah, duh, when it comes to the question of whether or not cities should have a Chief Design Officer, as long as they are an equal and respected part of the municipal team. Which is one of the reasons I was looking forward to meeting Hanna Harris. Hanna is the second Chief Design Officer in Helsinki and started in the position in 2020. We met in the amazing public library Oodi, a place where you can borrow books, of course, but also a place where the citizens feel a powerful sense of ownership. In the audio, you'll hear the murmur of the crowds in the background, and our recording is regularly pierced with the high-pitched voices of small children. Not something you usually associate with a library. But Oodi is so much more. It's just an indoor public space embraced by the people. I wanted to hear what Hanna's visions are for the city, how she works with the municipality, and what weight Helsinki places on design. Urban design, design thinking, citizen engagement through design, temporary urbanism, how design has helped with the pandemic, you name it. Like basically everything else in Helsinki, in this window of time, I was not disappointed. Hanna is so cool and clear, professional and passionate about explaining her work and the state of the design nation in Helsinki. Everything she was saying about what's going on in the city made me all warm and fuzzy. If I take a long, hard look at it, there are really only two cities to watch on the planet at the moment. Cities that are rushing headlong into the urban future, knocking over last century status quo, deftly leaping over traditional hurdles and barriers, smashing their way into a better place with rationality, citizen engagement, human values. Paris and Helsinki. And Helsinki has the ace in their sleeve. Design. Hanna, nice to meet you.
Very good to meet you, Michael.
Yeah. So I think what I find interesting is that you are the Chief Design Officer for Helsinki. Now, I know what that means, but there's not a lot of cities that have a Chief Design Officer. So can you just explain what your role is and what your daily job is?
Right, so I'll go take even back a little bit from when the role didn't exist yet, because it all ties back into there. So Helsinki, obviously as a city, has way back, of course, a strong legacy in design and architecture and so forth, and that legacy is there. But as a city organization, if really you look at how does the city itself as an administrative body rather than the city as the whole place, how does it think about design? What can it possibly do with it? How does it connect to taking the city forward and making it a better place in the future? So that journey, I suppose, for Helsinki goes back 10 years or so. So in 2012, Helsinki had the World Design Capital title, which is this touring global initiative where a selected city will look at across all sectors how it uses design and what it might do with that. And for Helsinki, that year was an important moment in really bringing together the different communities and different administrative sectors in the city, and of course partners outside to to look at, okay, how do we work with our people? How might we use design in looking at, let's say, issues that tackle across different administrative bodies, bring collaborative efforts together in them, and use really that power of design to go forward. So that was in 2012, and following that, sort of started the first work in hiring designers inside the city as well to do various pilot stuff across all kinds of things in different sectors in the city. I was based in London myself at those years and was closely following this journey with also partners outside at what will this all come to. And down the line, so different legacy projects started, and this sort of focus across the city really to look at the people or the user of different things that are outside in the city, but also in the kind of what happens behind the scene. How do we produce what we do? How do we produce services? How do we renew them, and so forth? So this sort of in-house design team started growing. And then in 2016 was the pilot edition that we might need a role which doesn't sort of lock into the existing sort of structure in a way that, we are now doing, let's say, social services, or this one is education, but a role that is more a citywide role, bridging across also the gaps that exist between the administrative silos. And so that pilot edition took place then. I'm the second one now. There was a mini gap in between, and we were sort of tweaking a bit at, what do we want from this role in the future? That's very much as well a sort of bringing people and ideas and places and practices together, and then working across the city with different, let's say, development departments, communication departments, and so forth, to help them take their work forward. So I started in 2020 at the same time with the pandemic, which has been of course an own thing in itself to jump on board.
I have a new job. I'm in my living room.
Yeah, exactly. And the city of Helsinki is the largest employer in the whole country, close to 40,000 people. So basically, of course, my job is to look at that whole organization, how we might use design, but very much also to develop a citywide network and these different units across the city who use that work. So that's kind of one part of it. So there's a sort of in-house team of designers, developers, so I work with them and we identify how we might take things forward. And then of course another side which has been there all along is very much to do with how Helsinki builds different partnerships, networks with cities elsewhere, and that sort of idea of what kind of profile Helsinki has as a design city. So of course we've got lots going on there in terms of the new Architecture and Design Museum, things like that. So those are kind of the key elements which have been there all along. And now the perhaps newer, or something that we want to work on more in the future, which ties more into directly the sort of issues you are working with, is to do with the urban environment. So now my role is positioned so that it's a citywide role, but I'm technically have one foot in the urban environment divisions. So we're looking at working even more in the coming years to bring in sort of what is done in the urban environment to the design thinking that has been taking place elsewhere. So I'm working on that connection a lot.
All right, so backwards, Helsinki became the world design capital, and you're like, of course it's Helsinki, we're Nordic capital, of course. So bring it here. Yeah. We got some design to show you. But it kind of sounded like what you said was that it started a conversation within the municipal structure, like design. Yeah. Like, of course we all know we're a design country, but wait, now we have to think about it in the context of our work. Did that create like a whole different culture and a conversation?
Absolutely.
That was worth something?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we sat now in Audi, the new central library for Helsinki, which of course, around the world people have seen lots of images of the building itself, which of course there's the element of architecture of what it is. But this is a very good example, this building, all the thinking that went into there, that how the different layers of, first of all, of course, the different people who come to the library and use different aspects of it, at what exactly do they want? What might we be doing with them? How do we work with them to co-create that concept of what then became this building? So that element has been a very good process in this building. But the other aspect, of course, has been the people who work here, a fantastic team, and how they have very much used different design methods to find that method of how they are running this building, how do they rotate staff, how are the teams organized, and so forth. And that work, of course, doesn't stop. It doesn't stop there where the building is ready and the doors are open. So it's ongoing. And I think of course, I mean, I work closely with architecture as well, and how we developing an architecture program for the city for the future and things like this. But this of course is a flagship building, but there's that connection to how this flagship facility connects to the other close to 40 local libraries in Helsinki. What does that network do? How does it function? How does it sort of craft out that idea of a library itself? And design has played a big role there.
Okay, back in 2005, I was in Tokyo for the first time, and amazing architecture. And then I just looked at this building, and the only way I can describe it's the Prada building. I'm looking at this building, and I'm going, okay, this is a really weird reaction to this building. And the only thing I can describe it as is erotic. And then I rode my bike here yesterday for the first time and saw Odie here, and I'm just going, okay, this is my new girlfriend or boyfriend or they friend, I don't care. I'm trying to figure out how to invite the building out for drinks. I'm really working on that. I'm just like, what? It's like one of these maybe 5 buildings in the world that I've seen since 2005 and discovered this emotion with the architecture, which I love architecture, I work with it, but I'm just like...
You are really onto something here. And this, in my previous job, so I was part of also doing the international launch of this building, and then doing an exhibition around libraries in Venice in 2018, which I commissioned there then. And this particular building and the kind of journey of what the efforts that people have put into it. And I actually remember the architectural competition was run in that year already mentioned, the 2012. There was all the results were on display. It was over 500 of them. And that sort of emotional attachment to this thing started. I remember when they were on display, people were queuing. They really wanted to see that what is this going to be, that ownership that was built at, hey, it's, you know, it's for us. This thing is for us, and it embodies some idea of values of what we believe in as people. People love this bit. I mean, they come here. There are these different spots. I love it. I was really happy to come here today to meet you specifically here. There is this. I suppose it sort of comes from the idea of a love of a library. There's no exchanges required. That you come in here, you do what you want, you learn, you rest, you share, you elevate, you challenge, and you go on and you take something from that.
Or you nap. I saw this old gentleman just napping yesterday. I mean, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course here, I think the extra charm also comes from this gesture. Is here, bang in kind of very valuable real estate spot, bang in the city centre, and it's there, and there's investment in people and investment in design at that kind of spot, which in itself is symbolically extremely important. Of course, we hear there's the Parliament building right behind us, so there is also, of course, this aspect of that, you know, we, the people of Helsinki and the visitors of Helsinki who have very much found this building as well, are here, and we are going to express ourselves and sort of make something of this place together in the future. And it is emotionally quite gripping. It's charming. Yeah. So
just before the pandemic hit, I started filming season 4 of The Life-Size City in Los Angeles, and I met their chief design officer. And I'm going, like, good luck with that.
Who I have not met.
No,
yet.
right, so he was a super cool guy, but I'm going, like, really? Like, LA? In your role, do you have influence on policy? Or is it like so many of these roles in cities with a fancy title, and hey, we did some thinking, here's a paper, and the politicians are going, thank you very much. And then, you know, I mean, do you feel like you have an influence on policy here, and they listen to you as the chief design officer?
Yeah, well, so I think, and this is how you sort of approach these things up there 2 ways. So it's important to do stuff and go out there and do stuff with you know, the city and the fabric of the city. And of course, there's been, in this sort of 10-year design journey, there's been lots of really good pilots. There's been work done both inside the city and with outside partners. And it's important to keep doing that. Do stuff, really do it. At the same time, of course, in order for all of that to have long-term impact, it's very important that the administrative beast, the body, takes those things on board. And that's something that, for me, is a very clear thing, that you have to work on both of those simultaneously all the time. And the sort of designing governance, I suppose you might call it, is, of course, it's a long and it's a hard process in many ways, but that's really where kind of the stuff happens. So, for instance, at the moment, I know in LA as well, one thing that they, despite, of course, the cities being very different, but something that touches upon both the city organization and, of course, the sort of outside interface is our public spaces and how we're thinking about them as key spots. And we have work to do in Helsinki, of course, as well. There, you might of course think Oodi, where we are, in a way, is of course a public space, an indoor public space. But how we develop key spots in the city, and importantly, of course, not just in the city centre but elsewhere as well, is something that touches on throughout. You're looking, of course, at the urban planning department and all of that, but you're looking at youth services, cultural events, you're looking at how the business sector is running, what support there is, and of course during the pandemic there's been a lot of stuff where the city has been learning as well, that hey, we need to do certain things quite quick, and we need to pull different departments in the city together around something that might not be clear for everyone what exactly the challenge is or where might we be going in this. And cities, of course, typically are very good at, they are delivering services that are legally required. There are very good sort of democratic processes in place. There's good sort of long-term planning. The harder bit is the stuff that needs to be done quick or tested or tried. For instance, in terms of public spaces, this is something that we are looking at the moment, and we have to be able to pull different units together and do something that sort of weaves together structures, that stuff that sort of drops between the gaps. This kind of work, in order to really drill into the policy, of course, there's as you know, we have a new mayor who has started literally 2 weeks ago in his job, and our city council is our elections, local elections, were postponed due to the pandemic already, so they have a very, very short window to now draft sort of the next 4 years city strategy, how that might then translate into actual budgets and stuff that gets done next year and the year after and so forth. And here, the kind of findings that have been coming out in the kind of work and conversations I've been having are things that really touch across the whole city. So we're looking at uses of urban spaces, of course, how people are currently using the city in the first place, how much do they move around, when they move around, how they move around, what local services they are using, how do we balance the need for, of course, like all Nordic cities, there's this pressure in relatively small countries, and then the capital cities are growing, and how do they do it in a way that is good for the climate and at the same time produces a good quality of life that is really sort of the thing that we have here. Yeah, there. So yes, to answer your question in short, yes, I do work very much with policy, and that is.
And you feel like that you have that influence. That was kind of the question. Like, you feel like you have the influence.
Yeah, I believe. Yes,
you have election cycles, so you got.
Yes, we have election cycles, and Helsinki takes kind of issues to do with design quite seriously. So it has been at a very high strategic level, and those findings from the first 10 years have definitely had influence on policy. So that idea of that we need to continue, for instance, looking at the services the city provides, doing it together with the users of the services, a kind of base thing, but that's one of the key things that has happened there, and also of tackling more sort of tricky issues. So the sort of service design, strategic design element has been quite strongly there, and perhaps now also bringing in more issues to do with working with urban spaces and people co-creating there is something that we will be doing in the future more still.
There's a position in many cities, I think 100, Chief Resilience Officer. And I know many people in my industry, my former industry, like, I'm the Chief Cycling Officer now. And but they never get meetings with the engineers when they want to talk about bike lanes. And some of the resilience officers have a lot of influence politically. But then other ones are going, hey, can I get a meeting? I'm this guy who's just sitting here being paid to be and nobody wants to talk to me, nobody knows what I do. So it's kind of cool to hear that in your role as Chief Design Officer, you're an integral part of the municipal structure, right?
Well, I think the important thing is, and of course, roles like this, you're aware of that, and it's a balance that you really need to work on that balance, because it's very important that the stuff that you're proposing and doing, that it actually resonates with, deep down in the system. So it resonates, let's say, something that remains then totally, out of the system. So for instance, I'll give you an example which we're working on now. We are working on doing a new urban playground, a playground for kids. One aspect, of course, like the presence of children in urban spaces, city centres, and the role of play and so forth as a theme is very important, and something that I believe as a city we have a lot to give there. We have an excellent network of public playgrounds already, which of course in itself is a collaboration of, the urban design department, landscape architecture, so forth, and then on the other hand the education department is providing the actual activity. Now, we've been doing a lot of work in that area in terms of making them even more accessible, and different kind of groups of people really understand that it's something that's free for everyone to use, and they are a very big sort of part of the fabric of well-being in this city. Now, there's been lots of talk also about, okay, how do we tweak designing them in the future, or more how do we work with certain themes. I have had a proposal, kind of a start of an idea on the table with this wonderful woman who's called Linda Leukas. She's kind of an ambassador of media and digital culture and coding for kids and stuff like that, and goes around the world and does really great things in that area. And she has sort of been tossing about the idea that actually it would be good to do something like this in the urban space and open for everyone, a free thing for really learning about how computers work without a single screen. Through movement and play and different three-dimensional activities and elements. So I've been working with her and then having conversations across the city with all the different departments who need to be on board in order for this thing to actually become a reality, and they have been the most fantastic meetings. We're working now with the Parks Department, the Playground people, the Education Department, culture sector, and all of these, weaving all of these together to find that common goal, so that it's something that really resonates with what the kids and then the people who work with the kids need in the future in Helsinki. And when these two things match, so there's sort of an seed of an idea somewhere that this might be a cool thing to do, and it actually, my job has been to find, it's kind of like a detective job as well in many ways. You find those right communities and people and make sure that you weave them together at the right moment in time so that it can flourish and grow into something that will benefit this city in the future. So we're working on such a project at the moment, for instance.
This all sounds amazing. I love to hear it. But is your job a thinking job, a meeting job, an analyzing job, a theorizing, or do you get to just hop on a bike with a shovel and go out and start working in some tactical urbanism, or in some community where you're actually physically on the street? You get to do stuff.
Yeah, the stuff, I'm missing the doing stuff in the street. That element is growing. Now, the first year has been very much I've had to sort of find out where things stand and who are we bringing together, and how are we doing that in a way that brings some additional value and new to the city and resonates with the policy work. So my job is very much to find those connections, speak to people, both outside kind of communities outside the city, but very much, of course, this first year has been speaking inside the city as well. But the tactical urbanism bit is something that we are about to set up a new team, if you wish, that will be working more closely on those things. So that's yes.
Because if I was you, I'd want to also do what you do, but I'd also want to get out there and sit with some like old people in a square going, you want better benches? What kind of benches do you want?
Well,
I need one with better back support, or like just and saying, let's do that, and getting some kids to build them.
Exactly,
like,
exactly, yes. Oh. So that is also what will be coming. So you can imagine the week that I started the job and I had this like go and talk to different communities in the city, the first month, and then let's start working on a plan. The pandemic started that same week, and I'm sat at home sort of like, oh my God, that this is I think Helsinki as a structure, how it works, I mean, it's very important, I think, in the future specifically, that of course, like any city around the globe, that we have issues in city centers to look at in the future, that what things are kind of the things that need to be in the center and people come and do and connect, and how do the centers sort of thrive and how do they support the rest of the city. But at the same time, we have a city that's growing fast, that's a wonderful city outside as well. We have that kind of balance of a really sustainable urban structure balanced with, from pretty much, I was kind of thinking about the idea of the 15-minute city here. In that bag, you add that within 15 minutes you can be in a nature conservation area, that kind of facility, which I live myself in East Helsinki, close to the sea, and it's something that, you have the metro, and you have literally from your doorstep you can walk out into a big forest. So those two elements.
First of all, I'm like, the 15-minute city, the 20-minute city. Sweden, there was last year was like the 1-minute city.
I know another one,
but I was like, okay, that was every city for 7,000 years,
exactly.
and now we have a need a catchphrase for it. But then I looked at my own neighborhood in a YouTube film I made during the pandemic, and I live in a very densely populated neighborhood, 12,000 people per square kilometer. But I put in parks and stuff, but now I'm just sitting here thinking, like, how far do I have to go to get to like a really, forest or whatnot?
Yes.
It's actually not that far. I mean, you take a bike ride. It's literally, I think it's about a 20-minute bike ride, 25 to get to a lake with woods, and I just walk around. You know what I mean? Like, so that's an important element to add to the whole 15-minute city.
I think here
it won't be 15 minutes in most places, but at least how far is it? Yeah.
Here it is. It might not be exactly 15 everywhere, but it is accessible and very easily accessible.
Like Oslo, you just sort of like just throw your keys backwards, and then they're in the forest. You know what I mean? It's like it.
And of course, the whole idea of, what is a city and what brings us to a city and what are those things that we desperately need and want from a city and how they function in the future. Of course, in the Nordics, that balance, which might also sometimes seem too obvious for us, but it's not an obvious thing, and it's something that really needs to be cherished, of course, in the future as well. It's every possible study shows, the benefits for how both the city is doing and we are doing as people, and of course the planet.
The pandemic. Now, early on, and I've been interviewed all the time, like, what about the post-pandemic city? Like, this is, that's all we want to talk about. So I'm going to ask somebody else and get some other answers that I can use later. No, bike lanes, Milan, Paris, Berlin, temporary bike lanes, Vilnius.
Yes.
Early on, like, we're just going to make the world's largest outdoor cafe because we got to keep business running, so everybody can, freely put their tables and chairs out and serve there. I've seen lots of, outdoor serving, temporary, what looks temporary, like structures. Paris went ballistic with it. I mean, it's really cool. I think a lot of the bike lanes in cities are being removed now. Some are being made permanent. The temporary ones that, Paris is doing great, Milan. Other cities are going, now we're done with that, The cars are coming back. But I think the outdoor serving has been the one major urbanist legacy of the pandemic. Like New York, Boston, weird places where, like, weird in that it's winter, and they're really car-centric. And I've seen a lot of them here, even in my neighborhood in Copenhagen. So generally, what impacted the pandemic, and I'm talking positive impact, did the pandemic have on Helsinki? Was there room for improvement, windows of opportunity?
The food thing has been one big one. As a city, we've been working on that as well a lot, and that kind of goes, of course, there's that actual need that, we need to be able to sit with enough space, and we need to be able to be outside. So that there's that actual need, and then we go, okay, do we have the space? How do we actually facilitate this? And we've done several. Well, actually, two things. The sort of more visible things have been these bigger outdoor dining areas that we've done both this summer and the previous one, and where we've really looked at very central spots. So, literally the Senate Square, and something that, okay, we are taking this spot, which is, of course, comes with all kinds of landmark issues and so forth, that it's this prestigious spot. And we will do something really nice here that's safe and nice, and which will at the same time help a lot of restaurants and bring people to the city centre in a safe way. And so that was the last time, and we've done it on another square this year, which has been a slightly sort of underused spot, the Kasarmitori Square, and which have been really, really taken on board well. And the thing, those are kind of the sort of visible gestures, but then there's been a lot going on in terms of, every little cafe, restaurant, how do they use the parklets, how do they set up their terraces, what do they do? And there is the sort of work that will have a lot of legacy, I believe, because there's been a lot behind the scenes sort of reviewing processes. How does stuff happen? How do we speak with those communities, the users of the restaurants themselves, and so forth? So that, I believe, around the world has been something that will really stick with us, and of course it has also brought out lots of bubbling things out in the suburbs as well, little local services, things that move around, food deliveries and so forth, and that has been wonderful to follow, and of course certain needs might change, but there will be remaining legacies and what people want. They have sort of fallen in love with certain city spots as well, the people of Helsinki. Like literally Senate Square, I think for me one result was that, because it's been this sort of from postcards of Helsinki tourist buses stopping there and so forth, and now actually it's like people of Helsinki, hey, this is our prestigious square and we like to hang out here, and we love this spot, so kind of fall in love again with that particular spot of the city.
But it is prestige if you just allow the citizens to not just that old school, there's a statue, there's a nice building, no demonstrations, no public, but like letting people activate the space, that is prestige, right?
But in a way, that spot, for instance, you look back in the history of Helsinki, that spot has been a spot where there's been this celebration of important cultural moments really coming together actually there, although you might have this image of it's sort of a slightly distancing spot, but it's been there. There's been prior to joining the EU, all these kind of big, really moments that have been defining Helsinki's cultural life as well, that have happened in that particular spot, and in a way that's sort of telling that, again, it can become such a spot. In terms of course, there have been cities around the world that have had a more urgent need than we've had here to actually make space for people to move around. So here we've first of all, the pandemic didn't hit us as badly as in certain other spaces, but also there's been more space to start with to move around. So it hasn't been of such urgency to make sure that, there's room on the sidewalk to walk, or there's room to ride your bike somewhere, because there sort of has been enough room all along. So we haven't had so pressing issues with transport arrangements to do with those things. Like in some places, it's come really from a very urgent need, and it's interesting to see now what happens with those arrangements. So here we've done certain things around certain pedestrian walks and making sure, but all along we've been able to move around relatively safely outside without having to tweak those systems too much.
Right. So I mean, Copenhagen also pandemic ready, even though we didn't know that.
Exactly.
Regarding transport and public space.
Yeah. So that's something that perhaps less on, where it becomes more. I think sort of certain things that have happened here have been more to do with, again, supporting and helping certain communities and the people and how to connect to them. So, for instance, we in the early days when there was very much kind of the issues of the elderly, that how are they, able to leave their apartments at all? Are they getting food from anywhere? Are they alone? So very quickly we set up a sort of a helpline where people from within inside the city were slightly reassigned the jobs they were having, and there was this literally, taking a phone and calling all of them. How are you doing? Do you need help in getting food to your home? Yeah. So it's been perhaps more in those kind of things. Or now, for instance, of course, a big question will be in cities around the world that young people have really taken a battering from this. So we are seeing this in mental health services and so forth. So this has been something that will be of extreme importance going to the future, and how, of course, the youth services have already now had to think about how they do work on the streets, what kind of support is needed and where. But I think, again, this comes back to these places of like this place where we are of ownership of the city, and how, for instance, young people are able to use the city in safe ways and have meaningful things to do in the future. So I believe, again, design and architecture have a big role to play there.
Now, in the Nordics and certainly in Copenhagen, stuff works. So the citizen engagement I see in other cities that are kind of broken, like Toronto I've never seen citizen engagement anywhere else in the world like there is in Toronto, because they have this huge amalgamation in the 90s. So they have one city hall and it's literally a 3-hour drive. There's no local democracy, So people just do stuff by themselves, right? And amazing. And certainly in really broken cities, struggling cities, the citizens are forced to do their own thing. Here in the Nordics, it's like, this stuff works. We kind of put our faith in the municipality because they've been doing some good stuff for a long time. What is citizen engagement like in Helsinki? Whoa, you want to talk to me? Oh my God, you want my opinion about stuff. But is there a strong sense of citizen engagement in a city that functions already really rather well?
Well, I'd say this is something that the city, again, as an organization, is very interested in this and working tightly on this. I think we have a lot to do still, and I think the area, specifically, again, looking at, for instance, urban environments, design, architecture, all of this, in the past years, people's motivation and will to get involved, of course not everybody wants to, but there is that in a way energy and passion to tap into. And on the other hand, of course, there's been lots of kind of more activist movements here as well, at stuff that we want to see happening, and how can we use our public spaces, and how do we tweak the systems so that we can actually, because at the same time, of course, Nordic cultures have this sort of which stems, of course, from ideas of really being, equal opportunities for everybody, and hence that goes with certain regulations as well. And so, of course, it should as well. I'm not saying that, but we do have work to make sure in the future that people feel even more that they are actually able to, for instance, influence what happens in their own neighborhood. And in many times, of course, we have very good legal systems, and there are laws in place about all of that interaction, how it happens, that engagement. But we do have work to do in how that timeline actually pans out, and what are the moments where and how we do stuff with people, and does it happen at the sort of right moment in time to truly give that feeling that we are all on board in this together. And there, so I mean, not a new idea, of course, in itself, but sort of methods of placemaking are something that, as a city, we need to work more on that kind of stuff in the future and make sure that we take on board people in different neighborhoods in, for instance, developing key public spaces.
Now, of course, you have to do that, but I mean, the citizens are responsive, though. Yeah. Generally, every time you.
Well, we have, certain, for instance, more high-profile big projects generate, thousands of people are commenting and taking part. We've had a very, very active discussion before the local election now as well about issues to do with design and planning. They are one of the kind of topics. You look at, for instance, we have a relatively new participatory budgeting system in Helsinki of certain monies allocated to areas for people to propose projects that they want to do. A large majority of them, again, are things to do with the urban environment. There is really, you kind of look back at both projects that then there's a voting system and all kinds of stuff that happens, but both projects that go forward, and I've been going through some of the ones that haven't gone through, there's people are really, they want to do stuff with their own sports facilities, parks, the benches, as you mentioned, all of this stuff, and they are really the kind of salt of everyday life that makes people, be in cities and have a city life and engage with other people.
Yeah, cool.
It's crucial.
Yeah. Well, Hanna, nice to meet you finally.
You too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're going to have lunch now, so we'll continue the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
That wraps up another episode of the Coolville Urbanism Podcast. I'm your host, Mikael Colville-Andersen. Thanks for listening. And remember, it's your city. Take it back.